Ever since Benedict XVI lifted the ban on the Latin Mass, it has been growing in popularity among the traditionally minded. But for most, they do not attend these officially approved Latin Masses because they have an objection to the Novus Ordo Mass. They just prefer the spirituality of traditional liturgy. Some prefer the old, some prefer the new, but they hold that they are both legitimate expressions of the same Mass. However, for some, adherence to traditional liturgy goes beyond just a personal preference for a Latin Mass. They hold that the new Mass is a danger to your faith.
The new Mass represents a danger to the faith.
These traditionalists recognize the modern hierarchy in Rome as their legitimate authority, and yet they have formed into breakaway groups that actively resist the man they acknowledge as Pope. They resist him by ordaining priests and bishops against his express wishes. They have set up a resistance hierarchy that operates Mass centers and competes with the Novus Ordo for attendance. On the surface, it may appear that the recognize and resist traditional groups base their resistance on more than just a nostalgic appreciation for Latin, but their position is somewhat confused. They will criticize the Novus Ordo Mass, and they will tell you to stay away from it. However, they are always careful to avoid saying that it is invalid.
It's definitely not our position as priests of the Society of St. Pius X that the new Mass is invalid.
Illicit means valid but unlawful. How can the Novus Ordo be unlawful when it is the officially approved liturgy of their church? A Mass would only be illicit when there is something about it that is contrary to law. For example, if the man offering it were not authorized to do so.
As we are saying to the authority, I'm going to keep celebrating Mass, and I'm going to keep giving the sacraments, even though you haven't given me your approval. And the faithful are saying to the authorities, well, we're going to keep going to the society, even though you haven't given your explicit approval to them exercising their sacred functions.
To call the approved liturgy of the Church a danger to your faith is a position that was condemned in Session 22, Canon 6 of the Council of Trent. Quote, if anyone says that the ceremonies, vestments, and outward signs which the Catholic Church uses in the celebration of Mass are incentives to impiety rather than stimulants to piety, let him be anathema.
The new Mass represents a danger to the faith.
A true pope cannot promulgate an invalid Mass, but neither can he promulgate a liturgy that would be harmful to your faith. This is their dilemma. If the new Mass is valid, it is the approved liturgy of the Church, and there could be no justification for resisting it. On the other hand, if the new Mass is not valid, the man who promulgated it could not be a valid pope, and the chair of Peter is vacant. But both of these scenarios are unpalatable to the resistance trads. Therefore, they will try to split the baby and say that the new Mass is valid but unlawful.
The new Mass is in any case illicit, in any case, because it's designed to please Protestants. It's designed to undo Catholicism. It must be, it's intrinsically offensive to God, it's intrinsically evil. That's how it was designed, and that's how it turned out. Okay, so it's illicit in any case. But the question of validity is different.
However, this is a proposition that was condemned with an anathema. The recognize and resist traditionalists would rather fall under the anathema of Trent than admit that the chair of Peter is vacant.
What I'm saying is that if you take the new Mass as it is, as it came off the press in 1969, and you say it, even if you say it in Latin, it's just still it is problematic. It's problematic in itself, not just in the way that it's said or the particular circumstances of a given church.
The Novus Ordo is either Catholic or it is not. If it is Catholic, then there could be no justification for not accepting it. But on the other hand, if it is not Catholic, then it should be avoided as deadly poison. But the idea that the Novus Ordo is valid but unlawful and a danger to your faith is a novelty that is incompatible with Catholic theology. At the root of these inconsistencies is a failure to correctly identify the problem. They have failed to answer the basic question, is the Novus Ordo Catholic or is it not? They very much believe that the new Mass is part of a new and evil religion, but the difficulty here is that a true pope cannot promulgate a false liturgy. everything rests on the question of the Pope. If Paul VI were a valid Pope, then it necessarily follows that the new Mass he promulgated is valid. But this principle is a double-edged sword. For if one were to determine that the Novus Ordo is invalid, then it would necessarily follow that the man who promulgated it could not have been a valid Pope. But this is a possibility that they have excluded from the beginning. Therefore, no matter what the evidence, they simply will not entertain the possibility of an empty chair. That is why, when asked directly, they will invariably seek to avoid giving a clear answer. Instead, they will try to take a middle ground position where they take both sides.
There's the principles and then there's the practice. In principle, the Novus Ordo Mass is a key part of the new religion, which is a major part of the worldwide apostasy of today. And therefore, the Archbishop would say, in public, he would say, stay away, keep away from the new Mass. I would say that in certain circumstances, like those you mentioned, exceptionally, if you're not going to scandalize anybody, because they know that you're a Catholic, they know that you're sticking to the true faith, and then they see you at the new Mass, the conclusion that many of them will draw is the new Mass is okay because she's going. You've got to be careful of that. So you've got to be careful. I myself don't think that the new Mass is always invalid. I don't think that. The Archbishop of Trent didn't think that. The principles are clear, and the wrongness of the Novus Ordo Mass as a whole is clear. But does that mean that every Novus Ordo Mass is invalid? The golden rule is this. The absolute rule of rules seems to me to be this. Do whatever you need to nourish your faith. If to nourish your faith you need to, and the Archbishop said, if you want to look after your Catholic faith, stay away from the new Mass. That he did say. So, but if, for instance, should I attend a society Mass, I take the position, do whatever you need. If you need to attend a society Mass, a decent society Mass, just like she's spoken of a decent Novus Ordo Mass, if you need to attend a decent society Mass in order to nourish your faith, go to the society Mass. If you need to stay away from every society Mass in order to protect your faith, then stay away from every society Mass. So there's not something that you can say to everybody. It's case by case, in my opinion. While the new religion is false, it's dangerous, and it strangles grace, and it's helping many people to lose the faith. At the same time, there are still cases where it can be used and is used still to build the faith. I would like to say it's all black or it's all white, but if I look at the way it is, it's something of both. Black is not white, white is not black, but the reality is black or white, there's an alternation of black and white, or there's a mixture of black and white and grey. That's real life. Therefore, the essential principle is do whatever you need to keep the faith. If a priest that you trust says, stay absolutely away from the new Mass, well, if you trust him, that might be the advice to take. Or if he says, stay absolutely away from the Mass of this priest, because I know that he's misleading, that's the advice to follow. But you make your own judgments. At our judgment, when we appear in front of our Maker, we're going to answer for the people we're going to answer for whose advice we chose to follow. We're not going to be acquitted simply because we followed the advice of a priest. Because the priests are obviously today not necessarily reliable. I've got to watch and pray, I've got to use my own mind, I've got to make my own decisions in my own circumstances. Therefore, there are cases when even the Novus Ordo Mass can be attended with an effect of building one's faith instead of losing it. That's almost heresy within tradition. But that's what I think.
But I hope it's clear that I don't therefore say the Novus Ordo Mass is good, or the Novus Ordo religion is good, or all Novus Ordo priests are good. It's not the case. Obviously not the case. Generally, it's a tremendous danger, and be very careful of the stay away from the Novus Ordo. But exceptionally, if you're watching and praying, even there you may find the grace of God, if you do make use of it in order to sanctify your soul. Therefore, I would not say every single person must stay away from every single Novus Ordo Mass. I don't. It's if they can trust their own judgment that attending this Mass will do more good than harm spiritually. But it does harm in itself. There's no doubt in it. There's no doubt about that. It's a rite designed to undermine Catholics' faith, and to make them believe in man, and to stop them to turn their belief away from God towards man. The whole of the new religion and the Novus Ordo Mass, which is an essential part of the new religion, is designed to get you away from the Catholic faith. And that's why the rule of thumb is and will remain, stay away from the Novus Ordo Mass. But, exceptionally, the wise thing would be probably to say in private to this or that person. But here I am saying it in public, that's maybe foolish. But you must work it out for yourselves.
This is the eternal problem of the SSPX. It has been and was the eternal problem of Archbishop Lefebvre, going both ways on the Novus Ordo. Either the new Mass, we'll go back even further, either the new religion is Catholicism or it is not. There is no third possibility.
A Catholic can never compromise or negotiate with error. The Recognize and Resist faction acknowledges the Modernist Novus Ordo Church as Catholic and works toward unification, what they call full communion. They mistakenly believe that they can work from within the Novus Ordo to bring tradition back to the Church, but you cannot have one foot in the Novus Ordo and one foot in the Catholic Church without making compromises. There is always a consequence for error. They are inevitably affected by the modernism. One error will always lead to other errors. In such endeavors, it is not the modernists who are attracted to the Catholic faith, but rather it is the Catholic who is attracted to the modernism and will end up losing their faith. And this becomes clear when you compare the conduct of the modernists to the conduct of the Recognize and Resist. In his encyclical, Pascendi de Medici Gregis, Pope St. Pius X describes the conduct of the modernists. This becomes still clearer to anybody who studies the conduct of modernists, which is in perfect harmony with their teachings. In the writings and addresses, they seem not unfrequently to advocate now one doctrine, now another, so that one would be disposed to regard them as vague and doubtful.
Therefore, I would not say every single person must stay away from every single Novus Ordo Mass. I don't. It's if they can trust their own judgment that attending this Mass will do more good than harm spiritually. But it does harm in itself. There's no doubt in it. There's no doubt about that. It's a rite designed to undermine Catholics' faith, and to make them believe in man, and to stop them to turn their belief away from God towards man. The whole of the new religion and the Novus Ordo Mass, which is an essential part of the new religion, is designed to get you away from the Catholic faith. And that's why the rule of thumb is and will remain, stay away from the Novus Ordo Mass. But, exceptionally, the wise thing would be probably to say in private to this or that person. But here I am saying it in public, that's maybe foolish. But you must work it out for yourselves.
Note that the conduct of the Recognize and Resist is very similar to the conduct of the modernists. When they are asked about the validity of the new Mass, they advocate now one position, now another, so that one would be disposed to regard them as vague and doubtful.
You know, Archbishop Lefebvre was terribly mixed up and always changed his mind about this, that, and the other thing, and was switching back and forth to whatever the temperature was in Rome. and expecting his followers to switch with him. And if you failed to zig when he zigged or zagged when he zagged, you were out. And so you had to, in order to survive, you had to be a good zigzagger.
But what about their beliefs? Have their beliefs been influenced by modernist philosophy as well? To answer this, we must first consider the question, what do modernists believe? The modernists hold that revelation lacks credibility. Without revelation, there can be no dogma, no doctrine, no authoritative church. Indeed, they deny the very existence of objective truth, and therefore they are not concerned with dogma. They hold that nothing can be known with certainty that is beyond our own experience. They call this process of experience vital eminence. What they call faith is an experience from within man. Faith is thereby reduced to an individual's subjective feelings, a sentiment of the heart. They hold that this sentiment originates from a need for the divine. This sentiment, or need for the divine, was placed in every person by God, and therefore, even though these experiences differ one from another, they must all be considered valid because they all contain at least some elements of truth. This diabolic system replaces revelation and doctrine with subjective experience. What is true for someone with one experience may be different for someone with a different experience.
While the new religion is false, it's dangerous, and it strangles grace, and it's helping many people to lose the faith, at the same time, there are still cases where it can be used and is used still to build the faith.
The Baltimore Catechism teaches that faith is a divine virtue by which we firmly believe all that God has revealed. What this recognize and resist bishop is describing is the modernist definition of faith, that is, faith as a sentiment.
Stay away from the novice ordo, but exceptionally, if you're watching and praying, even there you may find the grace of God. If you do, make use of it in order to sanctify your soul.
The modernists deny revelation, and consequently, they deny the authority of the church. They believe that faith is just a sentiment that is the result of an experience, and therefore, faith will be different for every man. The recognize and resist faction do not deny revelation, and yet, like the modernists, they deny the authority of the church. Without the authority of the church, there is no longer an objective standard to judge. Without an authority, faith becomes subjective, and it is reduced to a sentiment. One must look within oneself to find what feeds your faith. What feeds one person's faith may be different from what feeds someone else's faith. If your faith experience is fed with the Novus Ordo, go to the Novus Ordo Mass. If your faith experience is fed at a society Mass, go to a society Mass. Find your own experience. Let your feelings be your guide. There is no subjective truth, just a mixture of black and white which each individual must sift to find their own personal experience.
I would like to say it's all black or it's all white, but if I look at the way it is, it's something of both. Black is not white, white is not black, but the reality is black or white, there's an alternation of black and white, or there's a mixture of black and white and gray. That's real life.
He is speaking from, I would say, a very modern point of view, that things are gray, we cannot define them. That is typically modernist, I'm sorry to say.
While it is not strictly speaking incorrect to say that the Catholic Church has the fullness of truth, nevertheless, this terminology is a modernist innovation. It introduces an ambiguity that leaves an opening for heresy. That is, the idea that the truth can be separated into different degrees. We have the fullness of truth, whereas other churches have a partial truth. The very concept of partial truth presupposes that there are elements of the Catholic Church existing outside its visible structure. It also implies that the error in these other religions is of no consequence. As long as they contain some elements of truth, they are good. But this warped way of thinking is a danger to your faith. The truth is not something that can exist in degrees. Would you jump out of an airplane with many elements of a parachute? Would you call a bride who was unfaithful to her spouse only once partially faithful? Something is either all true or it is all false. Pope Benedict XV, Ad Beatissimi Apostolorum, quote, "Such is the nature of Catholicism that it does not admit of more or less, but must be held as a whole or as a whole rejected."
I would like to say it's all black or it's all white, But if I look at the way it is, it's something of both.
It is a virtue to think in black and white. That is, to think that what is and what is not, because that's the way reality is.
Archbishop Lefebvre developed the thesis that Vatican II contains errors, and therefore it is a Catholic's duty to sift the teachings of the Church and discern which are true and which are error. But this is just a variation of what the Modernists teach. Pope St. Pius X, Pascendi de Medici Gregis, quote, "In the conflict between different religions, the most that modernists can maintain is that the Catholic has more truth because it is more living, and that it deserves with more reason the name of Christian." To the modernists, the Catholic Church is not free from error. The best that they can say is that the Catholic Church possesses more truth than other churches. It is from this principle that the rest of modernist philosophy flows, and the recognize and resist position also holds that the Catholic Church has taught error, and therefore it is the duty of the clergy to sift the teachings of the Church, to sift out the errors. This is the fundamental flaw with recognize and resist. If you must sift the teachings of the Church, the most you can maintain is that the Catholic Church possesses more truth than other churches. But a church that can teach error would be fundamentally no different than any other church. The recognize and resist thesis is just a variation of modernist philosophy. Every religion contains some elements of truth. The only difference would be how much sifting one would have to do.
I understand, and you can't afford to eat a half-poisoned cake. I understand. But if the cake is half-poisoned, then there's half of it that isn't poisoned. And if you're using your mind, that point comes when you can begin to distinguish between what is poison and what isn't.
There can be no such thing as partial truth. The idea that the Church can teach elements of truth and error at the same time is modernism. According to the recognize and resist thesis, the Catholic Church teaches a mixture of truth and error which faithful Catholics must sift for themselves. They do not just sift for the parts that are true, but rather for the parts that might feed their faith.
The golden rule is this, that the absolute rule of rules seems to me to be this. Do whatever you need to nourish your faith.
Pope Leo XIII, Sanctis Cognitum, quote, "There can be nothing more dangerous than those heretics who admit nearly the whole cycle of doctrine, and yet by one word as with a drop of poison, infect the real and simple faith taught by our Lord and handed down by apostolic tradition." You cannot have one foot in the Catholic faith and one foot in the Novus Ordo without being affected by the modernism. You can find elements of truth in any religion, but one does not sift these false religions looking for those elements of truth. Any religion that you must sift cannot be the Catholic Church.
I understand, and you can't afford to eat a half-poisoned cake. I understand. But if the cake is half-poisoned, then there's half of it that isn't poisoned. And if you're using your mind, that point comes when you can begin to distinguish between what is poison and what isn't.
The recognize and resist may offer a valid Latin Mass, but their theology is mixed with poison. Catholic Crusader Films is solely responsible for the content of this video.